Esther Dyson, some of you had the pleasure of hearing her in the breakout just before lunch talking about environmental and climate justice. Esther is, I think without any fear of contradiction, I'll say a very unusual person in the depth of her commitment to the work she does, regardless of what it is. I got to know her when she was running a conference called PC Forum, which was the central conference for the PC industry, which is really what it was at the time. She started as a journalist at Forbes magazine. Then she became an investor in tech, very successful advisor to tech companies. But now you're doing something different. I want you to tell us what it is you're doing and why you need that apparently. Yes,
yeah, otherwise I've been silenced.
We weren't going to silence you. So what is Wellville and why are you doing Wellville, considering all the other things you've done in your life? And take all the time you need to answer that.
Okay, so thank you, David. And for what it's worth, PC Forum ended up as Platforms for Communication Forum.
I remember that too.
And,
yes.
You know, Techonomy took over
Which part of your heritage?
Whatever.
We were inspired by you, no doubt about that.
Anyway, so my parents are both scientists. My superpower is asking questions and some reference to previous asking new questions. Once you get the answer, then go on. And so that was one thing. I was a fact checker at Forbes, which is just great training for life. And what I'm doing is based not sort of, you know, love for humanity or kind of soft, nice things. It's more a fierce devotion to justice and common sense. I mean, hard problems are really interesting, curing cancer, but it's the stupid problems that offend me that we're trying to solve, which is, again, kids being damaged by the time they get to middle school, by bad parenting, by bad environment, by crappy schools, by bad food, all this kind of stuff. And in one way, we know how to solve this. I mean, the answers are simple. In another way, we really don't, because implementing the answers is complicated. So that's one version of the story. There's many others, but ultimately, I got really lucky with Square, the stock, and had enough money, and started after PC Forum. I started, as you mentioned, investing in healthcare in particular. And if you start to look at healthcare, you have to begin saying, well, why are we spending so much money fixing things that shouldn't have been broken?
Right.
Care is kind of a remedial activity. Health is an asset, and we can either increase our health, invest in it, health resilience, mental health, capacity, sense of agency, or we can destroy it. And I decided I was going to give a talk at something like this. You know, I really think somebody should do an X Prize for health instead of care. And I realized, of course, that that's a really terrible talk. Someone else should do something that I have an idea about. Versus, ladies and gentlemen, let me announce, it was called HICCUP at the time, Health Initiative Coordinating Council. And one thing I learned from a lot of time in Silicon Valley is people with great ideas often destroy the things they love because they're too driven. And anyway, I hired a CEO to kind of keep me in check. He's a great guy. Rick Brush used to be at Cigna. And one of the first things he said to me is, HICCUP is, you know, I'm not sure people understand that. He was very polite. I said, great, find something better. And that's when we came up with Wellville. The idea basically was to find 5 small communities. Originally, it was sort of a contest a la X Prize, but it became more of a collaboration. The feedback we got from them was, we don't want to compete with these other people. We want to learn from them and collaborate. So, but first we put out a call for applications to get basically coaching from, you know, the smart people that we were and maybe experts we'd bring in and so forth. You had to be a community of under 100,000 people. You had to be self-contained. The idea was to work with the community, not with a subset of the population. And they didn't need to know about Wellville. We wanted to work with the community leaders so that their institutions would be better at fostering the health of the community.
What was the message to the communities to incent them to work with you?
If you're trying to do this, we want to help you.
To do this being,
Make your community a healthier place to live.
that's a pretty big this, yeah.
Yes. And to our amazement, we got 42 separate applications. This was spring of 2014. And Rick and I and another friend called Marvin, who's now part of our team, went and visited 10 of the places and selected 5. Our goal was not to find, quote, the 5 best places. One of them, Columbus, Indiana, we actually did not select because it was too good. We didn't want to claim credit for something that they were already doing for themselves. And we wanted some geographic diversity, some diversity of the institutions we were working with, and some ethnic diversity. And anyway, Clatsop County, Oregon, Lake County, California, Muskegon, Michigan, which is the community I work in most and was there earlier this week. Face-to-face really rocks. Thank you for this. North Hartford, Connecticut, which not coincidentally is where Rick lives, nearby, and Spartanburg, South Carolina, which you might have heard this morning on the panel.
And these are generally relatively poor communities.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is sort of from what David Shore said, most of small communities, there are exceptions like Aspen and so forth, but there are a lot of places that have sort of lost their middle class, their industrial base, and there's some fairly well-off people left who want to help, and then there's a whole bunch of poor people of various races and persuasions and everything, and a lot of them are in trouble. I mean, Jim Fallows has done his own version of traveling around and seeing these places. So, but fundamentally what we're doing, as I might have said this morning, we're not handing out fish, we're not teaching them to fish, we're helping them build their own fishing schools. And we have no contracts with them. We have contracts with our team, but like we're not going in and bribing them. They haven't paid us to help them. And if our advice isn't good or it doesn't resonate with what they think their community needs, they can disregard it.
It is a little hard to understand what it is from the outside, but one thing you told me about it that helps me get clarity is that one of the most important things you found yourself doing in these communities is introducing the various agencies and groups in the community to one another, right? Like a child care center to an opioid treatment clinic or something like that, because these systems are connected.
Right. So first of all, I mean, I've learned a ton, and that's sort of the point. How does this actually work? And it's, if you did only one, you wouldn't understand what you were doing right and what you were doing wrong and what was universal and what was specific. But first, it just takes a long time to earn people's trust. I remember going to Niagara Falls, which ended up joining and then leaving, and that's when North Hartford asked Rick. North Hartford wanted to hire Rick, and we said, no, you can join Wellville instead and get him for free. This pastor said, yeah, we don't need people like you. You come in, you last for 2 years, and then you go. So after we lasted about 3 years, things changed. We keep showing up. We keep giving advice. We don't take anybody's job.
You made a 10-year commitment to each community.
Initially, it was 5 years, both because of time and money. And after 2 or 3 years, I felt comfortable saying and committing to 10 years. And one thing I learned is, yeah, 5 years is not enough. You're barely started. So I think our second 5 years are going, it's a flywheel kind of thing. And of course, COVID came, and we'll talk about that later. But so that's the basic idea. The thing I mentioned again this morning, there's so much competition when resources are scarce. Yes, you help out your family, but there's not enough to go around. So people aren't generous. And, I mean, again, there's lots of very generous people there, but the institutions are forced to compete. They're forced to, it drives me crazy when someone spends, you know, two months of somebody's time writing a grant to get $25,000 to get a grant for $50,000. It's not cost effective. And instead, they could be collaborating and reinforcing one another, which is what is starting to happen in different ways in each of the communities.
Are you getting ideas from doing this that give you, insight into what we might do nationally differently? I mean, you've heard a lot today
Yeah.
about national problems and
Right.
national solutions. Give us any reaction to what you've heard today and what you're learning in Wellville, kind of how it colors that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Wellville is we have no business model. We're lucky that I got lucky, but nonprofits don't generally make 10-year commitments. People don't pay for this stuff. We do need the government to, part of the problem is so much of government spending is allocated locally. And there are poor counties and rich counties, and in the counties, there are poor places and rich places, and school spending. Rich people go to neighborhoods where there are good schools that they fund and they donate to, and poor people live in places that they can't leave because they don't have, it's not just the income, it's the wealth
Right.
that gives you the ability to take a pretty good risk, but you can't take that risk because you don't have any of your own safety net. You can't leave your job to train for a better job. You can't go to a new neighborhood and again, have to find a new job, move the kids. What if it doesn't work out? So it's much more challenging. And so part of what I'm hoping is that government spending actually that we're hoping for from Biden over the next year or two actually gets spent on the kinds of things that David was talking about that people care about, which is education, but that the places that need it the most get the most, which is unlikely. But if they get
You think it's
even
unlikely?
their share,
I hope
Well-
I hope it might happen. It sounds like it could happen,
I mean,
but
some of it will, but again, it's relative.
well, one of the things I know that really obsesses you and frustrates you is the failure to think long-term,
Yes.
right? And even you said to me, I think at one point that was one of the things that motivated you to do this, was you saw so little long-term planning and long-term thinking. So are you able in these communities to shift that orientation? Have you begun to see a little bit of movement?
Yeah, well, again, so we're dealing with the leaders. There's kids thinking long-term, which, the local schools, we're not walking around the neighborhoods training kids.
Right.
But I mean, I'll take one of my favorite examples, talking to the YMCA in Muskegon, which is an amazing organization. They got us through Trinity Health, they got a CDC grant to offer diabetes prevention programs. And at one point I asked, so what would you do if you had enough money? And the answer was, we'd hire a few more counselors. And I said, but there's 180,000 people in Muskegon. Yeah, more than the 100,000 limit. The great thing about not taking money from a foundation is you can be flexible. Anyway, I said, but you have 180,000 people. That's like 30 or 40,000 pre-diabetics. How could you actually solve the problem, not just address it? And that question kind of resonated. They are now offering online diabetes prevention programs through, I don't know, 30 or something YMCAs throughout the state of Michigan. And they're scaling. And as you mentioned earlier, they're working with the Goodwill to offer childcare. So one lesson is go after the people who have capacity and help them do even better, rather than trying to you get a much better return on your money, whether it's for profit or not for profit, investing in things that have the capacity to scale
Right.
and to grow, and again, to collaborate. Like, you don't need a merger between Goodwill and YMCA, but you do need collaboration on these institutions, not just projects.
Yeah, you're really trying to intervene in systems which are almost by design resistant to being intervened with because they are so atomized and so established, and power centers are so discrete.
Well, yes and no. I mean, again, if you're not struggling, if you don't, if you have a feeling that you have the capacity to expand, you want to collaborate with other people because you see, wow, we could offer childcare. We could take our ability to work with kids, and the Goodwill has a building and they do worker training. Maybe we could collaborate and
Yeah,
we could build this new thing, as opposed to, I've got this thing, I got to keep it.
it's a very productive way to think. I want to
Yeah.
make sure we don't give the audience a chance to ask a question. Who has a question for Esther? Anybody?
I mean, one other thing, again, our goal is to have other people copy
Dawn,
this.
did you have a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Wait,
In,
Caitlin's
are we
bringing you a
working,
mic.
are we working with schools? We're working with schools in Muskegon, in fact, with the intermediate school district. And I think in North Hartford. Yeah. Schools,
that they want to impart
yes.
to students. It doesn't always work out so well,
the
but that's often the
Yeah.
intention.
I would say we're doing more in the area of childcare because schools actually exist. Ironically, both healthcare and schools kind of feel they're so busy doing what they're doing in their large institutions. The childcare people feel both more needy and more interested in help. At the same time, one thing I've learned, among many other things, is how much school systems, they're the fabric of the community. That's where the parents meet one another, where they, if you want to get what people were talking about earlier, if you want to get sort of community engagement and you want the parents to think long term, schools are great. We're working with Boys and Girls Club in Muskegon, but it's kind of outside the school system because the schools, for better or worse, are so, especially right now, it's just like they've got to get through the curriculum. They have all these requirements and they're very structured organizations. So it's kind of like the microbiome of the school system. The things that aren't actually formally part of the school system, but are attached to it. The PTAs, Boys and Girls Club, childcare, whatever.
Esther, I want to ask you to step back a level or higher up a
Yeah.
level. We're here to talk about the health and wealth of America. What have you learned and what do you think about where the health and wealth of America is headed?
It's headed worse. And we want to scale not by going to more communities, but by having other communities and the voters and the politicians and the people in government see that this is possible. I mean, when I started this, I was much more conscious of health and health metrics. And the reality is you're not going to get those unless people feel the capacity and the power to do it for themselves.
Yeah.
So role models are tremendously important. Watching other people. I mean, whether it's, one of the saddest stories I heard was about a white teacher in a Black school system saying, I just can't remember those kids' names. How can you, as a child, feel honored and respected if they can't remember your name? So anyway, I'm sort of dribbling away from your question.
Well,
but
it sounds like you have a hopeful but a hopeful hope, but not a terribly positive prognosis based on everything you've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like David Shore, I'm telling you the facts. I'm also telling you there is a way to change it. Just do it for yourselves. Find your own places. Watch these people. They're, it's like the army. You don't get to choose. We chose the communities, but the people in them, we're not selecting them and leaving the others behind. Precisely the opposite. We are selecting a few to work with most closely, but in terms of the community, they're working with the whole community.
Well, I
And-
think the example you've set of rolling up your sleeves and getting involved at the community level is inspiring and incredibly impressive. So thank you for doing that. And it's something far more of us ought to follow
Well,
you on doing.
I mean, just personally, I'm having more fun, deep fun, long-term fun, but this is the best part of my life. I'm learning amazing stuff, and I think it's really useful.
More
And
fun than all those Silicon Valley companies. Huh?
Absolutely. And we can do much better. We need to believe that, because if we don't, we'll never accomplish anything at all.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's
Thank you.
actually a pertinent thought to end with, to lead up to Jacqueline's next session. Thank you so much, Esther.